So I just want to start by saying that I'm in the middle of an initiative to get the work that I've been doing to Congress. And so I've gone to the great trouble of putting this study, which would normally be a paper, into a bound copy. It's the carbon clock is ticking. Children will live the future that burning fossil fuels is setting on fire. And we've been sending them priority mail to individual members of Congress to try to get their attention to some of the difficulties, dangers that children are going to face in the future. There are two real areas of this that I want to share in this video if we have time. Both of them focus on why children and young people's lives, future lives, are in jeopardy. This is a time of maximum danger for human societies. It's a time in human history where we must all stand together. If we don't stand together, then our kids are not going to stand a chance. So that's the work that I'm doing. And I think the thing that we have to really get our heads around is that the world will probably burn through the carbon budget before the Global Climate Panel issues its next update on mitigation. It is incredibly serious. So I want to talk a little bit about existential risk. I've been working on studies of existential risk for at least 20, probably before existential risk was the name was coined. But the futureoflife.org defines an existential risk as a risk that has the potential to eliminate all humanity, or at the very least kill large swaths of the global population, leaving the survivors without sufficient means to rebuild society to current standards of living. And CSER, the University of Cambridge Centre for Existential Risk at University of Cambridge, defines X risks similarly, and the centre is dedicated to the study and mitigation of risks that could lead to human extinction or civilization collapse. For someone who's as old, I'm 75, so the idea that we would reach a point where we're actually discussing this was certainly not something I was thinking of as a young person. But our children are thinking about it, and there is children are anxious and concerned, especially young people, and we really have to attend to what we are doing that is having an impact on their future lives. So I'm going to talk about 3 existential threats to all of us, but especially to young children and young people. The first is that young children and young people will experience escalating heat, humidity extremes that are too severe to tolerate. Heat stress that is deadly will become commonplace. And we're not talking about at the end of the century, we're talking within this decade, that there are places on the planet where the heat will be so great that human beings can't be outside. And if you think about how many people do not have air conditioning and do not have the means to keep cool, this is a very serious and deadly problem. So the urgent question that Congress must address and we must ask is, how will escalating heat, humidity extremes impact the lives of children and young people? It is one of the most essential questions that we should be asking today. So one of the studies that I have quoted in here, and I will make sure that this paper is available, is by Aaron Bernstein at Brown, who has tracked what happens to children in very hot weather. And by looking at the number of children coming into emergency rooms, and there is an escalation, a great increase in the number of children who end up not only with heat-related, it's not only that heat becomes the problem, it becomes a problem because of all of the concomitant illnesses that come with extreme heat. The second existential threat children and young people will experience is the rapid increase in life-threatening disasters. Scientists are studying the number of disasters that take place on an annual basis, and the number is going up exponentially. So the UN report speaks of 400 in 2015 to 560 by 2030, and that it's an increase of 30%, and that number is exponential. And so children, I can't remember a catastrophic weather event in my childhood, but children are experiencing them on a yearly basis. The thing that keeps me awake at night is that while there are so many urgent problems that we're dealing with, we're not dealing with the one that could actually impact the lifespan of our children. So, and the third existential risk is that of massive displacement of people. The IPCC has forecast that by 2050, over a billion people will be displaced and will become refugees. Now, if you think what's happening with Ukraine, and we're talking about 5 or 6 million people, which is an absolute tragedy. But if you think of that in terms of a billion and how close that is, we're talking about a few decades. And there is no planning, and we are not working at this, and Congress is not focused on it. So that is the three existential risks that I think there are many that are the most serious. One is wet bulb heat. The second is the number of catastrophic events. Think of Yellowstone. Think of the fires. Think of the high temperatures. 100 million people were told to stay indoors last week in the US because of extreme heat. So if you multiply that and think about how it will be for children in the 2030s and 2040s, then we have a serious problem, and we are not attending to it. So those are the things that I think the real problems that we're facing, and it leads into my concern and the research I've been doing, which is part of the research that I've just sent to Congress, on the impact on children and young people of big oil's first and second existential deceptions, their big lies. So it's a pivotal moment when we should be moving towards net. In fact, we should have reached net zero, but we haven't. The fossil fuel industry has known about climate change since the 1950s. The industry spent billions on gaslighting not only the public, but governments with their climate denial, and just kept pumping. That's the first deception. And you have to imagine that the fossil fuel industry has lobbyists, they're spending billions on lobbyists, working with governments, working in the private sector, working at the UN, and also gaslighting the public, so that for years and years, when we could have been moving towards zero carbon energy, kept us pumping, kept our feet on the gas, incredible ads on television, beautiful cars that we can all drive that were gas guzzlers. They kept us thinking that maybe climate change is just something a few scientists have, cooked up in their laboratories or something. So that whole structure, the complexity of their lobbying to make us think that global warming was a hoax, has now morphed into thinking that we can still go on using fossil fuels and still reduce the carbon. And it's called carbon capture. So again, billions of dollars is being spent by the industry to gaslight governments and the public into believing that we can use fossil fuels and still reach zero net carbon, and we can't. So think about existential risk, the challenges that our young people are going to face as they grow older, and I certainly won't be here, and think about the fact that we could have decarbonized, and we could at this point be using of energy sources that are not based on coal, gas and oil, and be very all of us need to analyze. We need to think about the ads that are seducing us into thinking that we can go on burning fossil fuels for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So this is a time of maximum danger for children and young people in the US and around the world. It's a scientific fact that children will live a future that burning fossil fuels is setting on fire. The work that I've been doing, I've actually been out on a limb, and I've been talking to one of my colleagues saying how little there is, how little research there's been looking at carbon capture and sequestration. Even the Biden administration has supported it. None of the projects that they have funded, both the government and fossil fuel industry, have been successful on a level that would allow us to decarbonize at the level that we need to do it. But I was really happy to see that someone sent me a letter from 400 Canadian scientists to the government in Canada, and it verifies the position that I've felt I'm out on a limb in making. So here are the scientists. It's just one paragraph from their letter. So Canada can learn from the mistakes of how a similar tax credit. The most diabolical part of this is not only will it not work, the fossil fuel industry, it has persuaded the US Congress to give it tax relief at a rate that is about half the amount that we spend on the military each year. So we can't deal with the fact that kids, our young people have grown up and they're absolutely burdened with debt from going to college, but we can give the industry this carbon tax on a process that is not going to work. So it's called 45Q. So Canada can learn from the mistakes of how a similar tax credit, Section 45Q, was implemented in the US. The biggest beneficiaries of the American tax credit are oil companies. Analysis done on the 45Q tax credit found it could result in at least an additional 400,000 barrels per day of CO2 enhanced oil production in the United States by 2035. It's not just that we're being told that using fossil fuels will not increase the CO2 in the atmosphere. It's that the fossil fuel industry is ramping up production with the idea of continuing to ramp up through until 2050. And this is the important piece, is that the public, us, we need to know there is no plan in the US to tackle the climate crisis. We must challenge the fossil fuel industry's global spheres of power, uncover the lies, expose the false narratives, and shred the arguments used to gaslight us, which is essentially what the carbon clock is ticking is trying to do. The window of time we have left to respond to global warming is closing, and for the sake of children, we must act and deliver. So that's the only way we can save the future for the world's children and young people is for everyone, all humanity, to act with common purpose now.